Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Made for More podcast. I'm very excited to introduce Zoe. Hello, Zoe. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Ali, what a delight to be here. You're such a radiant star. It's going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. We were already just having a quick discussion before I hit record. I am very excited to dig into today's topic. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about where you've come from and where you're going.
Well, the first thing you're going to hear is my accent. Apparently, I have one. And I'm imported from Canada, land of lakes, rivers, and maple syrup. And I got extracted from Canada and landed here in 1996. What I was doing over in Canada was scrambling through life as a student, getting my English literature degree, and having a real life in the summers where I led canoe trips and did outdoor adventurous stuff at a summer camp. And that sort of kicked off my career, if you like, and that brought me out here to Australia, where I worked at Outward Bound, which is personal and professional development in the outdoors. So I had more grand adventures here in Australia. Then I worked at the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation and went heavy and long into leadership in different contexts and different industries, which is a bucket of fun. And I set up my own leadership development business in 2002, did it part-time for a long time, and then have been running that professionally for the last full-time for the last 7 or 8 years, 8 years, I think now. Where am I going? How exciting. There's so many different things I am going towards. I'm writing some new books. I'm continually offering leadership development to general managers and CEOs across industries, and going to move to Newcastle at some stage, which is pretty exciting.
Oh, my sister lives there.
There you go.
There you go.
All the cool people.
That's where all the cool people are. That's right. So tell me a little bit around, you started off doing adventure outdoorsy things, which then shifted you into Australia, and you're in Canberra at the moment. But when you were saying outdoorsy personal and professional development, what are we talking?
Okay, so 3 different contexts for doing outdoor kind of work. And the first one is really pragmatic team development, self-development. That's what I did at summer camp. That's really learning about who you are as a human and what your limits are and how you interact and work with others. And that's sort of what I also did at Outward Bound. It was like pushing your own personal limits, discovering more in you than you thought there was there, and also how to work and establish team development. So that's sort of one aspect of the outdoorsy work. Another part of the work that I did in the outdoors was using the outdoors as a bit of a container or metaphor or a platform to understand how we perform as leaders under pressure, how we respond to difficult circumstances, and how we can work better together in face of ambiguity and uncertainty, which is really, really relevant to where we are at now. And the third way that I've used or experienced the outdoors in the leadership development context is actually using it as a way to decompress and also to access awe, which gives us a different brain state. And in face of beautiful landscapes, spectacular vistas, big mountain ranges, all that kind of stuff, what happens in our brains is really quite interesting. The research shows that it lowers our activity in our frontal lobe, which is where our sense of self exists. So that gets dialed right down. And in this state of awe, we have a sense of extreme connectivity to all things, and that sort of being overwhelmed by the amazingness of whatever we're experiencing allows us to be more calm, more stoic, and also therefore more creative, because it reduces the filters we put in place and allows us to make connections we hadn't seen before. So I use the outdoors to help people get into that state so they can reflect on themselves, their work, their leadership, and in a place that elevates their thinking, elevates their state of being. So it's 3 different ways to experience the outdoors as a way to shift understanding of self, team, and leadership in general. So that's sort of what I've played with for the last 30 years when it comes to the outdoorsy side of my work.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating, because I obviously these days you can't go anywhere without hearing about connecting with nature and get out and get grounded and all of these types of things. But I have never heard the experiencing of awe and what that does to your frontal lobe. That is fascinating. And I actually love the outdoors. I'm very lucky to live right near the beach, so I will constantly be able to be like, oh my gosh, look at it today, and I'm quite enamored by the nature. And I think we don't often spend enough time just taking it all in, but I had no idea that there was that cognitive link with it as well. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So there's been I teed into some of this research in Dacher Keltner's work. He wrote The Power Paradox, which is an amazing book, which I highly recommend. And it's also, that kind of research has been hooked up through exploring astronauts' experience of looking back on the Earth, and it's known as the overview effect. And one of the astronauts who came back in the early or late 60s, early 70s, talked about this sense of oneness. It's almost like an enlightenment experience they had, just hanging in space, looking at our beautiful blue dot of a planet and going, it is so fragile, it is so miraculous. And that sense of connection to all living things on the planet, and this respect and honoring of life forms and life itself is what a lot of astronauts experience when they're in space. In fact, there's iSpace Lab, I think it's called, is working to give people that experience of the overview effect through virtual realities. They've got these VR glasses that people can put on, and there's some filmography of being in space from the International Space Station and other things that they sent up there, and they piece together this experience that people can have, and you can get that sense of awe through VR. And the idea is to build that sense of connectivity and creativity and collectivism that a lot of the astronauts have experienced in their view of the world from space, which I think is an accelerator for leadership consciousness and leadership development in general. So I'm pretty excited that we're bringing the opportunity for people to get the overview effect on land through VR. But it's a pretty profound experience. You don't have to go to space to do it. You don't have to put on VR headsets to do it. You can climb up a hill, look at the sky, and marvel at the beauty. And it's one way to have that sort of experience. And I think it's actually pretty fundamental for leaders to have those experiences right now, because it allows them to access different aspects of their brilliance and their creativity that they wouldn't necessarily get when they're caught up in the trap of what's happening next week, I can't get through my work, all that kind of day-to-day grind stuff. We need to get out of that into these bigger picture, bigger states of being, so we can find new solutions to the challenges that we're facing right now.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that's wonderful that you've tied that in with the leaders and been able to have, get out of the four walls of a cubicle or your home office or whatever it happens to be, and be able to actively and intentionally activate that creativity side of your brain. Is it from a problem solving perspective that you're finding, or is it what's been sort of, I guess, with the work that you're doing and the work that you do with leaders, what's been the main results that you've seen from people being able to experience that overview effect?
Well, for some, it's individual reflection. So a couple of years ago, before lockdowns, took groups of leaders from different organizations out into the Larapinta, which is a beautiful, expansive walk just west of Alice Springs, this spectacular country out there. And they had 4 days together where they could enjoy the wilderness and take them out of their normal experience, to give them somewhere new to just settle, decompress, shed any of the stimulation you get from mobile devices, all that kind of technology stuff. So that deep reflection is the first outcome or experience they had, the opportunity just to press pause and think deeply about what's happening in their own personal and professional worlds. In terms of teams, this is a vouch for really good offsites, leadership retreats and offsites. We go somewhere spectacular, or it doesn't even have to be spectacular, like on top of a mountain, but somewhere beautiful in nature really allows people to access their creativity. And that's the first part, their creativity. And the second part is their connection with each other. Yeah. And so when you have experiences like that, you get to see each other from a totally different angle. Your social guards drop a little bit because you have to band together to work out how you're going to operate in the new space, and sort of everybody's a bit more on an even keel. So that connectivity and that creativity really combine beautifully in offsites in spectacular settings. So that's what I always encourage leaders to do. If they're thinking about their strategic planning, don't do it in the freaking boardroom. Like, go somewhere which is a little bit different, and it'll get you to think differently and make different connections and different ideas.
Yeah, I love that. So you mentioned around, being able to press pause and almost recalibrate. And I think collectively, the entire country, the entire world has done that to some degree. And I think, certainly here in Adelaide, we've been in a little bit of a bubble. Similar to Canberra, you've had a shorter amount of lockdowns and timeout compared to some of our other states. What do you think, or what are you seeing now leaders need to be making that shift, whether they're transitioning back into the workplace or whether we're trying to get to, back to kind of a normal and regular way of living and leading? Obviously, there's a number of different things to be thinking about. What are you noticing that leaders really need to be able to stay relevant for right now?
Well, there's the pragmatic stuff, right? And people are sort of chewing on that. The pragmatic stuff is, how are we going to organize our work arrangements? Are we going to do hybrid? Are we going to make people come back to offices? And how do we run logistics of that? How do we run the culture based on that? So I think there's some hygiene issues around that need to be looked at. I think from a bigger picture point of view, there's something more important to pay attention to, though. And it's something that I talk about with my Amplifiers group, which is my high-level leadership development program for CEOs. And we talk about the transition from being an achiever to being an amplifier. An achiever is kind of like what we know to be a successful leader. It's a conventional idea, like we galvanize the troops, set a plan, move people forward with the high performance levels and kick some goals. And that's achievement, and extremely important. We don't want to ever throw that out. The challenge is, though, when we get to the context in which we find ourselves now, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, VUCA, as you might have, know as the acronym. I would add exponential into that as well, exponential change. So we have this whirlwind of a context, and it means that we have to lead differently. We can't just keep leading as an achiever, which is all about setting goals and plans and just walking through our steps in a linear way towards an outcome, because things are shifting and changing all the time, as we've all experienced over the last 2 years. So there's 3 things that we need to do in order to be able to contend with a new context and survive it and not burn out. And the first thing that we need to do is reduce friction. We need to reduce friction in our organizations and our systems and our relationships. That's the first thing. And the second thing that we need to do is to build capability in ourselves and in the people around us. That's how we amplify our capability and our resources and our resilience, is that piece. And the third thing we need to do is maximize energy. So that means building up our own personal energy as well as the energy of the team. And specifically, that means accessing flow states. And so being really in tune with what we can do to structure our flow of work so that we can be in that hyper-creative, hyper-productive state as individuals and as a collective. That way we can produce way more ideas, way more deliverables. So we can get more stuff done better, faster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you touched on there around maximizing energy and finding your flow state, the leaders that I'm working with at the moment, they're going, I'm finding that I'm most productive between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. 1, there's not people there all the time. And 2, that's just my natural time when I'm most active and most creative. And then on the reverse side, I've got some other clients and a CEO in particular who kind of works in shifts. So he'll come back online for whatever it happens to be from 8 till midnight, and that's his flow state. Do you think that there is, we've worked in a world where we've got a 9 to 5 and everyone went into their office and went home again. And then over time, there's been, boundaries around when you're on versus when you're off have become more and more blurry. Whilst I think it's really important that we do have boundaries and that leaders are very clear on those, do you think there is an opportunity, and do you think there's a space for teams to be able to work cohesively where you are optimizing people's individual working time while still maintaining boundaries?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. Yeah. And the experiences that you're talking to, Alessandra Edwards, who is a performance genome expert specialist, she would talk about how our DNA actually programs our biorhythm. So some people, as you've mentioned, are early morning people, and some people are late at night people. And it's the late at night people who struggle mostly in the 9 to 5 setting, because they don't actually rev up towards the end of the day when everybody else is or a lot of other people are winding down.
Yeah.
And so the workplace is actually not designed to leverage the talent of those people who are genetically disposed to be more creative and dynamic later on. So there is opportunity now with flexible hybrid working arrangements to allow people to set their workflow based on their own genetic profiles.
Yeah.
There is some challenges though, because that's great for individual performance. It's problematic when you're trying to do team activities together. And so you got to find the narrow window that suits where you're like, I'm waning and you're waxing. How do we actually come together? The second aspect of what you talked about in terms of I get my best work done between 6 and 9, it may be the biorhythms, and it's also the ability to concentrate, the ability to do deep work, as Cal Newport talks about. And it is a significant contributor to getting into the flow state, is the ability to focus on one set thing at a time. And that sort of hooks us into that creative space. I think hybrid working arrangements can possibly allow us more autonomy to set up our workspaces in a way that can promote that, depending on what your home life situation is. Not everybody's home life is conducive to non-interruptions. Some home places are just interruptions altogether.
Yeah, I have 1,000 kids, so I'm continually interrupted by my thousands of children.
Kids? Yeah. Well, you've been busy.
I know. It is a little bit like that. So you work, in fact, you've got a book called The People Stuff in that leadership. So tell me a little bit around, I mean, I know that traditionally leadership, we've been focusing on business acumen. I think more and more we're shedding a light on the soft skills, air quotes, soft skills of people management. Tell me a little bit around what prompted you to write People Stuff.
It was asking leaders that I work with, which is a standard intake question. What's your biggest challenge in leadership?
Yeah.
And it was always some version of, it's the people, it's my team, it's dealing with the board. It was always the relationship stuff.
Yeah.
It was never, I can't think of how to develop a really good strategy. Most leaders actually find that part of the work easier. They love that kind of deep thinking work. Their challenge in doing the deep thinking work is actually carving out time and space and applying tools to do it. But that's another story aside.
Yeah.
When I ask people about this, it's the people dynamics that are problematic. So I started digging into that a little bit more. It's like, okay, what kinds of challenges are you facing? And what is the stuff that keeps you up late at night? And I started to map it out from there, essentially. We solve the problem stuff, and then leadership's so much easier.
I often joke that leadership would be really easy as long as there was no people involved. Similar to the communication, communicating would be so easy apart from that, variable of people that often we have to deal with, of course. So we were talking just before I hit record as well around this stage where we are right now. We're talking about the Great Resignation. There's people that have pushed pause, and now that they've pushed pause, have decided that actually when they want to push play again, perhaps it's on a different path or at a different pace or in a different environment. What are you seeing now, and how can CEOs navigate being able to support their team to be able to do what's best for them, but also making sure that you don't have a mass exodus of talent across an organization?
Well, I think the fundamentals apply, right? So if you're worried about losing people, then you need to look at your basic practices. And there's a couple of things that to have in place to make sure that things are going to go well. And that's how you set up your culture from the first place. And I always get my leaders to do a culture compass, which includes a culture charter. So a charter of behaviors that you all agree to as a team, that you collectively agree on, and hold each other to account around. That you're really clear on your purpose, you're very clear on the results you're meant to generate, and you're really clear on who your customer is and what you're actually in business for. So that kind of clarity of scope and focus is an example of one of the fundamentals. I think if people were, are people going to leave me? It's like, well, why would they leave you if you're doing everything brilliantly as a leader? Like if you've got purpose, results, your structure and your workflows are encourage flow as opposed to friction. If you're leveraging people's strengths, and if you've got good stories where people can actually speak up and share their perspective and their ideas without fear of retribution, those are the fundamentals that we need to have in place. If you don't have those in place, people are going to leave for sure. And I think the other aspect of the Great Resignation is it hasn't really taken off the way it has in the US. yet. Will it, won't it, don't know. There's definitely some industries that are under pressure and finding it difficult to either recruit people into the industry. And it's often the industries that are trying to recover, like hospitality and tourism, and some professional services as well, where people are sort of shopping around going, well, I can work from anywhere. So I'm going to find the setup that works best for me in terms of team dynamics, culture, support, resources, rewards. And if you got things, if it's too hard, then people will go for sure.
Yep. Make it easy.
Make it easy for people to enjoy working where they are. And so all the fundamentals I just listed. And also, like, the biggest thing that's an attractor, and the research showed this, research by OC Tanner in 2016 showed this, is that more than money, more than purpose, autonomy, and mastery, which Dan Pink talks about, it's recognition is the thing that contributes most to people enjoying their work. And oh my God, how simple is that? To say, thank you, that was amazing what you did here. So get those fundamentals right. You have a better chance of not worrying about the Great Resignation.
Yes. I've been speaking to a few leaders lately, and they're going, "Don't tell me it's coming. I'm already right." And they are in those industries that you just talked about, where either they're recovering or they're in like quite a transient, and people are job hopping as well. So what kind of things do you think I think we're in a new age of leadership these days, where there is more focus on that connection. There is more focus on people enjoying themselves at work. If we're talking 9 to 5 or 40 or 50, 60 hours a week, however many hours it happens to be, I think there's definitely a shift in focus, and also a responsibility for leaders to be helping to create that kind of environment and culture. What kind of shifts do you think that leaders really need to be making so that they are relevant, so that they are effective for, the end of 2021 and the beginning of 2022, for the next 12 months?
Well, there's the three that I mentioned, which are to reduce friction, maximize, build capability, and maximize energy. Yep. And aside from that, I think really for me, the secret is around perspective. And that's essentially what my book, People Stuff, is about. How do we see better so that we can lead better?
Better so you can lead better. I love that.
See better so you can lead better. Or seed better. Well, that's mixing a couple metaphors in there. Why not? But see better so you can lead better. Yeah. So I think developing our point of view and our perspective so that we can see more is really critical. And so I want to see leaders look further, far, deep, and wide is essentially the three areas that they can start to focus on, as well as reflection on self. Perspective on self is really critical. And becoming a reflective practitioner is one of the most important things we can do as leaders to help us grow and develop. So that's having a look at the end of the day. How did I show up today? Where did I get derailed? Where did I do well? Where could I have done things better? And also interrogating our thinking. I think that's also really important. And there's been a lot of conversation in the last couple of years about cognitive bias. And when we start to take an X-ray vision looking at our beliefs, I think that's pretty important. I was having dinner with a friend last night, and she said, she was telling me a story about, she was thinking about this, she's in a new relationship, and she was talking about this guy she just started dating, and he's from a different culture to her. And these little thoughts bubbled up that she knows came from her parents, her European background. She's like, oh my God, that's a racist thought. That's a racist belief that's come up from my background. I don't want that belief. I don't want that thought. And it's been sitting there under the surface. And she was horrified that it was there. She never believed herself to be racist. And yet there were these little seeds, there's the word, little seeds of belief that sort of sat in their background. And she was asking me, like, have you ever had an experience like that where you've surfaced some beliefs that you didn't know were running the show? I'm like, oh yeah, all the time. All the time. And I think as a reflective practitioner, we need to start to master that, and to be able to observe our thinking and not take our thoughts as a default or as truths, and to hang on to our beliefs a lot more lightly because they are constructs that are not necessarily the truth, even though they feel like truth. So I think that is absolutely one of the meta skills that leaders need to have, is this ability to reflect on their thinking and how they put meaning behind things and what beliefs they hold, because it guides behavior, it guides feelings, it guides everything. So yeah, putting a flashlight on that is step number one in my point, in my point of view, in my perspective. There we go.
Perspective. You are absolutely speaking my language, and I think we do need to spend more time thinking about our thoughts. I call it head junk, but I think everyone's got a version of something they don't realize until it bubbles to the surface, and you go, hang on a minute, where's that come from, and what does that actually mean right now? So just to backtrack on what you were saying earlier when we were talking about the awe effect and when getting out into nature, can having that the overview effect, rather, does that help unpack and recognize your thinking when we're talking about thinking? Are they related or not related?
The sense of awe puts you in a different state of mind.
Yeah.
Could you then start doing thinking interrogation from that? I think so. I haven't actually asked that question or been asked that question before.
Oh, I love when I get to ask a fresh question.
Yeah. So I think intuitively, I want to answer, yeah, one could be a precursor to the other. Because when you're in a state of awe, all your cortisol and adrenaline is lowered. So you're less reactive to anything. And if you want to pull out your journal and then start doing some reflective practice around your thinking, then obviously that's going to be a great time to do that. Because you feel so connected to the bigger picture that your little picture of the little I of you becomes less clingy, if you like. You can sort of feel okay to examine all the warts and all aspect of the little I sense of self.
So hold it lightly.
So,
I love that. That's really, really interesting, and definitely a practice that I think is something that we all need to practice, really, not just leaders, but everyone having a look at what is it that we're thinking, and what are our thoughts telling us, and are they true, and do we need to keep holding on to that belief? Probably not in a lot of instances, and there's probably some that we could hold on to a little bit more tightly. I know particularly for women in leadership as well, there's probably some beliefs that they can hold on to more tightly and let go of some that no longer serve them as well.
Well, it's choosing your software, right? So that's what beliefs are, is like, it's what programming are you running? And you get to choose the programming. We don't have to run on default stuff. So absolutely, we can choose beliefs that just that support us. And the other work that I would point people towards is Buster Benson's book, Why Are We Yelling? Have you come across that one?
No, but I think I need to read it. But what is it, Buster Benson?
Buster Benson. Why are we yelling? And the subtitle is How to Have Productive Disagreements. And it's really important, I think, for where we find ourselves now, where there are so many polarized conversations around, you name it, vaccines, elections, lots of different topics. And what we find is that we dig into our point of view, our beliefs, and we alienate and ostracize those who don't agree with us. And it's no way to live. It's a very stressful way to live, and it leads nowhere in terms of resolution of issues. So his work is really amazing on that. I had the great privilege of interviewing him on my podcast and exploring it a little bit differently. So yeah, I would highly recommend that. And look, his key methodology or his key principles is to not try and go and change people's minds, but the paradigm is to bring minds together. And to do that, you just need to be extremely curious about someone else, where they've come from, where their ideas have come from, and that you have a conversation based on questioning, compassionate questioning, like, how is it that you came to have these beliefs? Why do you hold it to be true? What would have to be true if you were to change your mind? Like, you have questions like that. And you're not trying to get an angle and to chisel away their argument. You're just trying to understand where they're coming from. And it makes life a lot easier when you don't have your buttons pushed by someone who disagrees with you. And I think there's great hope and promise in that kind of approach and that kind of work. And it is all about perspective and exploring points of view.
Yeah. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about your book. You held it up for me before, which was awesome. It is a multi-award winner. Tell me a little bit, or tell the listeners a little bit around it. People Stuff Beyond Personality Problems.
Yeah, an advanced handbook for leadership. So People Stuff, it's about perspective. And the first part of the book is about how do we do that? How do we look far, deep, and wide? And there's a couple of activities and processes to go through where we can start to look at how to expand our point of view. Then we talk about perspective on self and using archetypes to help us show up as the best version of ourselves in different contexts. So there's 5 different archetypes to contend with. The next chapter is around perspective on other people. And this was the 4 devils of people stuff.
Yes.
And problematic behavior that pops up in workplaces and relationships and what drives that. And the last piece is actually a short chapter on what we've talked about, which is the overview effect and that sense of connection and oneness, and how we need to redefine what we think us is, and so that it's ever more expansive and inclusive. And that allows us to lead with both wisdom and compassion, where we lead with the best of our mind and best of our heart, where we can lead with both being sensible and sensitive. And I think that dichotomy or that dynamic is one of the things that leaders need to hold in their approach to leadership. We were talking before you hit record about that, the tensions about, being compassionate and still holding people to account is that polarity that leaders need to navigate. Yeah. So the work in this book is about how to do that, how you can actually lead with best of the heart, best of the mind. So you can hold those 2 spaces, sensible and sensitive at the same time.
Yeah. So true. Amazing. Sensitive. I'm just writing my own notes here to look up later. So thank you so much. Zoe, this has been incredible. I wish we could keep talking for many, many hours. But what would be, to wrap up, your 5 tips for leaders?
Right. Well, I did my homework and took some notes around that. So we touched on a couple of them. So one of them is to develop a reflective practice. And so pull out a journal, whether you actually take audio notes or written notes. Written notes tend to help cement our ideas better and to externalize them better. And a couple of things that you can do in your reflective practice is to have a win log. I love that idea, where every day you record your wins for the day. And the reason we do that is that it helps build up a sense of confidence in our abilities, and it helps boost our morale, because if you're waiting for the earth to move and as a metaphor, and for your success to arrive, whatever, it can feel like you're in the desert. So having a win log, it makes you feel like you're actually developing a sense of progress, which is really motivating. The other thing you can do in your reflective practice is to look back on your journal and to see how far you've come. And Dan Sullivan talks about this. He says that if you want to get confidence, look backwards, not forwards.
Yeah. And
what he means is that you look back on how far you've come, because it's often a lot further than where you think you have to go. If you're always looking forward to where do I want to go, what are my goals, it can feel like a long way away with so much uncertainty. But when we look back and see how far we've come, that sense of progress is really motivating. So that's 2 pieces. So that's, point 1A and point 1B. I'll take that as two tips there. With a perspective piece, it's looking far, deep, and wide. And when I say far, I think as leaders need to think a little bit more extensively about their time horizon. I heard you mention it on one of your interviews as well, with how many generations are we thinking about when we make decisions. And the Iroquois talked about 7 generations, which is only about 200 years or so. It's not that long when you think about it in the context of our First Nations people in Australia, of 60,000 years of human history. And if you expand that out to human history in general, a couple 100,000 years. And then if you think about life of the planet, 4 billion years, your sense of time horizon can really, it's an important stretch of the mind to think about that, because it puts your decisions into a different context, and it helps you think about things a little bit differently, so that you're not always pressing react button. So that's perspective on far. Deep is about looking below the surface of issues, and there's a number of different activities you can do to do that. I like doing a problem tree, where you take a visible problem And then you take two branches off and go, well, what were the two contributing factors to that? And then you do under each of those bubbles, what are two contributing factors to that? And you go down several layers on your problem tree, and it's usually the little things at the bottom, which are the significant contributors to the problem. So that's one way to look below the surface, to look deep on an issue.
Yeah.
And the wide piece is all about who's in the circle of us. Where does your circle of concern end? You know, is it you and your family? Is it you and your team? Is it you and your organization? Is it you, your organization, your community, your country, your planet, your universe? And the wider your sphere of concern, the more compassionate you're going to show up. And when you're showing up with compassion, you're actually more calm. And that makes leadership so much easier. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's 3 points. That's 5 points. I have one more, if that's okay.
That is okay. A little supplementary. Yes, of course.
All right, supplementary point number 6. And that is to use the archetype of the elder to help channel all of your leadership activity. And for me, the elder is like the big kahuna of all the archetypes. And the elder has the ability to lead with both wisdom and compassion, as we mentioned previously, best of the mind, best of the heart. And if you're wondering about how do I make a decision about this, think about an elder and how they might approach it. You know, what's the wise approach to this? What's the compassion approach to this? And how can I blend the two together? So I think if we keep asking, how do I operate as an elder, no matter what our age or background or cultural norms are, I think that would serve us a lot better. If we have more people operating as elders, we'd have less reactivity and more proactivity and more wisdom and more compassion, which is a good thing, I think, in leadership.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on something really important there, is you don't necessarily have to be the elder. Just think, you know, what would the elder do in this scenario or in this situation, and bring that that elder hat to the decision-making table, or whatever the process happens to be that you're going through. I think that's fantastic. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. I will put all of the links to the resources that you've mentioned, and also the link into your book as well, for how people can grab a copy of that. What I would like to know is, you mentioned you've got a free download for people as well.
Yeah, it's called How to Spot and Deal with Difficult Behaviors in the Workplace. And that's on my website, zoerouth.com. That's ZoeRouth, like mouth with an R is my last name. And you just click on resources, and there's the free guide right there.
Brilliant. And I will link to that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for your time today, Zoe. It's been amazing.
Thank you, Ali. This has been a delight. And thanks for all the work that you're doing out in the world too.
Right back at you.